Today, we'll be talking about AWS Network Firewall as part of our, more or less like our security series, right? Because we've seen all the ways you can secure your workloads in AWS. And today, we're just going to be talking about one of those ways, right? So the first thing we'll be talking about today is like a network firewall, right? Network, basically. We've talked about, I think in the last, maybe it's in this class, we'll talk about it. I don't know if we've talked about like web application firewall. I don't know if it's in the last class I mentioned it or I'm going to talk about it today. But you know, there are different layers, right? There are different layers of your applications, right? And there are different layers of the solutions you host in AWS. But at the network layer, you can also have a firewall. And this is different from security groups that we've seen. It's different from network ACL. It's basically a firewall that you can have that keeps track of your, your traffic, basically, as it's coming to AWS or as it's going out, right? You can have one layer where you're looking at everything and you are blocking what you don't want, right? And allowing the things you also want. In this case, it's a VPC traffic we're talking about, right? So remember, we also said like in a VPC, you can have a VPC flow log, all the traffic that is going, you can actually see it. You can see the ones that are being allowed and the ones that are being denied, right? So you can do layer 3 to 7 inspection. So IP, ports, protocols, domains, you can even have a pattern that you might want to look at. On the advanced side, you can do like deep packet inspection. So if you Google Suricata, it's more or less like an open source framework for you to do network monitoring, right? Do threat detection on your network. So you can actually bring in your Suricata rules into the AWS network firewall if you wanted to use that. So for advanced cases also, or if you have like rules that you were already using, like in your on-premise environment and you are coming to AWS, you can just bring that over, right? So there's place for stateful versus stateless rules in firewall and the firewall in AWS firewall that we're going to see. So stateful, for the most part, is usually more or less like in the case of stateless, you're not really putting so much attention to like the state, right? More or less like you're not taking you're not in this case you're not really putting so much consideration to like if it's outbound or inbound traffic, like because you don't care about the state the statefulness of the traffic, right? But for stateful, you care about those things, and you'll see an example of the two. Remember, this is like a light introduction to firewall on the networking side. As you go deeper, you begin to understand some of these things. So I'm not going to stay long trying to break it down because there's just a lot we can still learn from there. It auto scales, right? It's a managed service. You're just installing it, and AWS is going to manage the scale for you, which is many of the benefits we've seen for the cloud, right? And in one of the things you also see is that for rules, you see different types of rules. AWS manage rules, meaning if you don't want to craft your own, you can see pre-built rules updated by AWS that you can use. You can also create your own rules. Just the same way we can do manage policy versus AWS manage policy, you can see the same type here. And then you can get rules from AWS Marketplace. So if, for example, you're looking for some rules that already exist that a marketplace is providing that solution, why not? You can also use it, right? And we'll see how that works in a second. So when you now think about it, you can integrate it to your VPC, right? Transit gateway, if you remember, transit gateway is like a centralized way you can do networking, right? So more or less like an easier and centralized way. So network firewall plays very nicely with a transit gateway, right? So you can in one place just decide, how traffic is moving. You have to go through my firewall, and if you're coming in, you have to also go through my firewall, and there you can do packet inspection and drop traffic if you want to or allow, right? Obviously, you can send in your logs. As with most services, you still want to be able to monitor. So you can send in logs to S3 or CloudWatch to see exactly what is happening, right? Benefit is fully managed, protect against known and custom threats, centralized rule. You can have centralized rule, and then flexible deployment for east-west or north-south traffic, right? Just depends on the direction of the traffic you're looking at here. So we'll go to the console basically to look at what that looks like. Here, I'm not going to take you in depth, right? I just want to show you more or less like, because if I tell you network firewall, sometimes and I don't show you anything, sometimes it's hard to reason. I'll just show you a glimpse of it, right? But there's more you can do. So before this call, what I've done is that I've more or less like updated my account up to a point where right? So everything in my account currently, you know how to do. and I'll show you exactly those things. Okay, but again, I also want to put a caveat here. Many of the people that are following me on this class, to some extent, they have credit in their account. They can try these things. Some of these things come. This particular class comes with some cost, some very tiny cost. If you're willing to just try it and tear it down, right? Just so you know, it's not completely free tier. And I know why I'm introducing it like this, so that at the beginning you're beginning to see all these things, right? But if you really want to learn tech, be willing to spend some change to get something out of it. Okay. So what have I done? Just to make it so that we don't waste time, I've created, so I'm using the default VPC. I'm not really creating a new one, just to also reduce the complexity. So what I've done here is I've created a private subnet. Right? I think we've gone through this in the lab. So what I just did, I just gave it a private subnet. So think about the private subnet is really in this case where I'll put my workload, right? And then I want to inspect traffic and make sure that I can block traffic that is either going out or coming. Depends, right? So one thing you also see, you will begin to start appreciating the power of subnets. So this is VPC, right? So if I go to subnet, like I just mentioned, there is a subnet here. And if I click on that subnet, you see that it has a route table. And in that route table, there is like the rule that says if you are going through the internet, go through the NAT gateway. So in this case, if you're going to the internet, just go through the NAT gateway. You're free to go into the internet. We know this already, right? So if you check my NAT gateway is somewhere here, basically. So it's here. So I just put it, in this case, it's not highly available. I created just one for one subnet just to show you exactly. And you know how it is when you create it to associate a public IP that it uses to take you out to the internet, right? Because we're talking about private instances that don't have public internet. This is like a refresher. We've gone through all this before. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is now to start creating basically like a firewall subnet. That's what I would now be creating, right? So what I would do is that I'll go to my subnets. I already have public subnets. There are public instances there. I have a private subnet. I'll now create a firewall subnet, because ideally you need like a subnet to keep your firewall, and then you can use that to decide how traffic moves, right? So you begin to appreciate the power of subnet apart from the private and the public subnet that we've talked about. Okay, so what I'm also going to do, just to make sure that we can move fast, I'm going to click EC2 here. So I'll do EC2 instance, and then I'll launch one EC2 instance in my private subnet, the one that I showed, right? So I think this should be basic stuff for most of us who have been on this call consistently. So I'm going to launch an EC2 instance. And in this case, I'll just call it web server, right? So I'll call it web server, and then I'll do Linux 23. It doesn't matter. I don't really care what it should be. T2 micro, a T3 micro is fine. I'm just going to use a T2 micro. And then I'll scroll down. I'll go without the keep here, right? If we're not talking about SSH, sometimes we don't really care that much, right? So here I'm just going to edit the networking configuration because I want to choose the particular subnet I want that EC2 machine to be launched, right? So here is the same VPC. The subnet, I have preference. In this case, I'm saying private subnet, right? So in this case, I'm saying private subnet, right? So I'm saying the private subnet. So obviously it won't have a public IP. Security group is fine. For inbound rule, I don't really need any. So I don't need any rule, right? Because that's not what I want to show. For advanced configuration, the only thing I'm going to just do is just to give it an instance role, right? So more or less like instance profile. And if you remember the last time we were talking about systems manager, so I'm using it here so that I don't need to have SSH and all that. So now I can just use systems manager to go in, right? So it's using Linux, obviously the AMI Linux 23, so it should have systems manager agent running in there. So I'm just going to launch the instance, okay? So it's launching. While it's doing its thing, we'll go back to our subnet. And this is where we now need to create like a subnet. So in this case, we are going to create a subnet. We're using this VPC, right? I already have, so I'm going to go back to this slide. So I already have like a, what do you call it? So I'm going to go CIDR, and then I'm just going to do, remember, if you think about where we're coming from, sorry, let me go back to where we're coming from. This is the VPC, this is the CIDR 172.31.0.0/16, right? So in there, I've already created blocks for all the subnets, but here I'm also just extracting a new block. So I'm doing 172, right? So I'm doing 172.31. I think I've shared this page before. I'm doing 80 and I'm doing 0 and then I'm doing /28, right? It just tells me I'm doing /28. From here, I have only 16, which is fine because I just want to use that subnet for my firewall, so it's fine. So I will use this so that you know. But if you check the block, you see that that's the next block after the private subnet I created. So in this case, I'm just going to call it my firewall subnet. And then I'm just going to say, in this case, remember, I'm working with just one AZ, right? In the ideal world, your solution will be redundant. But in this case, I'm not really focusing on that. I'm just focusing on one AZ. So in this case, I'm going to use US West 2A because that's where everything is. So US West 2A, this is the VPC CIDR. For the, what do you call it? For the CIDR that I want to use for this subnet, I'm going to paste it here, which is what I showed you on the other side, right? So firewall subnet, I'm just going to create the subnet. Must be a valid, I think there is a space here. So I'm just going to do create subnet. So it has created a subnet, right? Remember, a subnet needs a route table, right? Because that route table is really what decides where it goes to. So I'm just going to create it also while I'm here. So I'm just going to create I already have one, but I'm going to actually get rid of it so that we can create one together. So I'm going to do delete so that we can create one afresh. So private route table is what my private EC2 instance is going to use this route table to communicate from that subnet, but I'm going to create a new one. So in this case, I'm going to call it firewall subnet, right? So I'm just going to do this. The VPC is going to be the same VPC, right? The VPC that we have is the, sorry, I think I named it wrongly. It's supposed to be, please, let's get the naming convention right so that somebody will not be confused. So I'm going to call it, what do you call it? It's a route table, okay? So it's a firewall route, right? Table. Let me just call it like this. Use this VPC, right? So I've created a subnet. So let's see the instances that are launching. We have one, right? It's running now. Let's try and get into it using instance SSM session manager, right? We can. I'm sure we can connect. So let's give it time. Let's give it time to connect. You remember for systems manager, you basically just need the right role. You need that IAM role to have that permission, and then let it just be running systems, the SSM agent, right? And then you can get in using systems manager, which is what we are doing. So if we do ping google.com, right? So we can get to the internet, right? At this point, you know what this is. This is a private EC2 instance. We're using the public, the NAT gateway in the public subnets to go out, right? So that's what we're doing here. So we have an EC2, right? But now we want to bring in a firewall, right? So we want to bring in a firewall. So what I'm just going to show you is that if you go back to this route tables, we have two, right? So if you look at the private route table that EC2 instance is, there are two rules. This one says if you are doing within the VPC, go local. If you are going to the internet, use the NAT gateway, right? But all this will change very soon. And in the other case, if you look at the other route table, which is the firewall route table, there is nothing. Within the route table, it just has local route, right? So let's go and create a firewall. So we'll do firewall AWS Network. This is like the manager. I'm looking for the firewall itself. So firewalls, under firewalls, I'm going to open it in a different tab, right? So I'm going to create a new one. So I'll create a firewall. Remember, I said if you don't want to spend any money, don't do this. For many of the people that I teach, you probably have a little, like some credit you can spare, right, to get this done. So I'll say my VP. I'll just call it my VPC firewall. Okay. So I'll say my VPC firewall. Okay. Cool. And then I'll do next. In this case, it's asking me what's the attachment. Is it a VPC? Is it a transit gateway? In this case, I'm just going to be using a VPC, right? This is where I'm choosing the subnet where I want it to be, like, right? Because the way it works is that at some advanced point you learn this, but what it does is that it deploys like an interface endpoint, right? Into your VPC to create an ANI there. So in this case, I need to tell it where, right? So in 2A, there are like three different subnets, but I did create one specifically for the firewall. So in this case, I'm going to call it the firewall subnet. That's where I want you to launch into. IPv4, I'll use IPv4 as a stack. In this case, it's asking me for delete protection. I can turn them off. Subnet change protection, all that. I'm just going to go with I'm going to turn it off and just go next. Okay. So in this case, it's asking if we need like a firewall policy. So as part of creating the network, the AWS network firewall, I'm just going to create a default policy, right? So here, create and associate an empty policy, which is what I'm going to do. So I'll just call it default, right? Default policy. right? So I'm just going to do it, strict order. In this case, I'll say none, right? Because it's asking me drop action. Does it just drop everything or drop all? In this case, because it's my default, I'll be like, no, don't drop anything. So everything can go through the firewall for now. Good. So I'm just going to do next. Pretty much that's it. I'm just going to create the firewall, right? So now the firewall is creating. It's being created, and it has one policy. Remember, at this point, we already attached it to a given VPC, right? The VPC we have, and it's creating, it's provisioning, it has a default policy. We now need to create a group. We now need to create like a rule, right? A rule is really what is now evaluated against. We need to now create like a rule that says exactly what it needs to do. Because when you create a firewall, you want to block something. It's either you want to block a domain or you want to block an IP address. Here we'll create a very simple case, but it's obviously you can extend it as much as you want. So we'll go back to firewall. Firewall is provisioning, and then we'll just go to the rule groups. We'll create a new one. So here we don't have any rule group. I'm just going to create a new one. I would say stateful. Remember we talked about stateful. We talked about stateless. But again, sometime at some point you understand the details. But in this case, I'm going to use stateful because I'm just interested here in more or less like the that particular traffic. I'm not really paying attention to more. So I'm actually in this case I'm paying attention to the state in this case, right? So stateful is like a good rule I can use. So I'm just going to go stateful. I think it needs me for so I'm going to use like a stateful rule. Let me see. I can use a stateful rule in this case. I'm just going to go there. I'll say my block. Sorry, I'll just call it block IP, right? So I'm just going to call block IP block. I'll call it block external DNS for now. So I'm just going to give it a capacity. Usually, as it is, it's a managed service, but you still need to define like a capacity that it's going to use. So in this case, I'll just choose 3. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, I think we can do it with, okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a stateless. I think this is going to require me to define more things. I'm just going to use a stateless rule, a stateless rule group, okay? I'm going to use that in this case. So block external DNS IP. I'm just going to do this. So I'm calling it block external DNS IP. I'll give it a capacity of 3, and then I'll do next. Okay. So priority, I don't really care. In this case, it's matching all protocol, right? Here is where I can more or less like choose which protocol I want to match. But in this case, I'm going to be matching all the protocols, right? The source, I'm just going to use any IPv4 in this case. Destination is where I want to choose a custom destination, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste 888, and I'm going to explain why we're doing it this way, just as an easy way for us to show the demo, right? So I'm saying that if you're going to 888, what do you want to do? I want to drop it, right? So I actually want to drop that traffic. And for the rest of the things like publish metrics, TCP flags, I think all those things I can actually leave them. So I'm just going to add like a rule. Yes, in this case, remember, I can't just do 888, right? I have to do like /32, for example, to say I'm talking about one IP address in this case. And it's also saying must use the source and destination must use both the same IP source. Yeah, I think by now it should allow me. What is it saying again? Source IP. Yeah, I know. So add rule. Same IP version. Um, yeah, I'm inspecting all. So what is it saying? Destination IP address. Add the rule. Interesting. This is strange. Let's see. Add rule. Yes, IPv4, right? Let me see. All protocols is really what I want. Source IP is this. Oh, I think yeah, I probably know what is the problem is. Sometimes when you paste, that's what happens. There's like a, I think there's like a glitch in the, there was like a space in between, right? So, but here I'm actually doing, I'll just do up all IPv4, right? So I'm going to actually delete this one, right? Delete this one. So let's just go back. So I'm doing all IPv4 address, if that's the source, for example, in the case destination, I'm doing 888/32, but I remember there's like a space before it, so I'm just going to clear it. And then I'm saying drop, right? And then for the rest, push metrics, all of that, you can say metric if you wanted, but in this case, I'm not really interested. So it's a very simple rule. I'm saying all protocol, the source is everywhere, IPv4, and then the destination, if it's going here, just drop the traffic, and then I'm going to do next, right? I'll leave the default, I'll do next, and then I'm going to save the, create the rule group, right? So what did we call it? I think we did call it a block external DNS IP, right? But the fact that we have that rule group does not mean it's going to be used. We have to go back to the policy that we created before, more or less like the default policy that we created, and we need to apply this rule group to that policy, right? So we'll go in and look at the policies. Um, Let me see this firewall, for example. I want to see which policy it's using since I have two. So firewall policies, there is even no policy right now that is added. So let's see. Um, is there even a default policy that we give? Yeah, okay, so yeah, I'm just trying to be sure so that I know which one we're editing. So if you see there's like a default policy that we have, right? So this is the one we should edit. Sometimes you have to be careful to be sure what you're doing, right? So in this case, we did create like a stateless rule, right? So what I'm going to do is to see if we can add a manage stateless rule. And the last one we created was like block external DNS IP, right? So we're going to add that rule to that group. So now it's effective. So if you also go into the firewall, for example, you can actually see how things are progressing. If it's syncing the change. So if I scroll down a bit, you will see that it's pending, right? So the default policy is getting updated. The external DNS is also getting updated. At this point, all you have is a network firewall and then a set of a policy groups that will be evaluated. But that's it. You've not really connected it per se to your subnet or your VPC, right? So what we can basically do now is to go back to our two subnets. Remember, there is one subnet that is a private subnet. There is also another subnet that is a firewall subnet. So what we want to do is basically we want to say that if you're from the private subnet, before you used to be able to go directly to the internet, but now we want to inspect your traffic. Don't be able to go to the internet again. Instead, you have to go through the firewall subnet to get to wherever you're going to, right? And then from the firewall subnet is where we'll say, once you get here and you're good to go, then you can go to the internet, right? So that's what we're going to be doing next. But remember, we just created a rule. So what it means is that if I come here and I do dig on 8.8.8, right? It's going to work, right? It's going to work. And I'm sure for some people, you probably don't um you in case you don't know what 888 is, 888 is also like a, it's like a what do you call it? Because if I do, for example, I do dig, I do google.com, you see that I have like a resolver that is here, right? But I can actually use a different IP to resolve, to do like my UDP resolutions, right? Which is what I'm using for 888, right? So what we can do is that we can actually dig, for example, we can say, instead of using the DNS resolution resolver that we have, let's use 8.8.8, right? And then let's do tiktok.com, right? So tiktok.com. So at this point, it's working, and you can see that here we're using the local server, but here we're using a different server, right? .8.8.8. But now we have a firewall that is saying you can't use this DNS server again. We're blocking it completely. But how is that going to be in effect? So take note of it. Right now we can do, what I'm just saying is that we can actually do dig on 888, right? .8888, we can do that. We can also use it to do DNS resolution, right? In this case, right? So all that is working. So how do we now apply a firewall such that it doesn't work? You will not be able to do this again. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to where we're coming from. We're going to go to our subnets. So before now, we used to be able to say, so if you go to, first of all, private firewall, the private subnet will go in there. And for the route table, right now we're going to edit we're going to go back to the route table and edit that route table. So for the private route table. So instead of being able to go to the internet, we'll have to say you can't go again directly to the internet. So we're going to be doing edit route. And here, instead of going to the internet, we're going to add a new route, and we're going to say if you're going out completely, use the gate load because it's going to deploy it as a gateway load balancer endpoint. Okay, so we're going to say use the firewall, right, to go out, right, and then we'll save changes. So when we do that, right, we now also have to go to the firewall and say at this point traffic is going to get to you. You're going to decide if you're going to block it or you're going to allow it. But after that, what happens? Then that's where the firewall subnet also has to say if you're going to the internet, then you can go because if you can, if I at this point, it's either I've blocked you or I'm allowing you to do your traffic, right? If I'm allowing you, then if you're going to the internet, you can go and then use the NAT gateway to go there. So I'm going to go back to my subnets. I'm going to go to my firewall subnet, and then I'm going to my route table, and then I'm going to edit my route table, right? So in this case, I'm not sure which of the subnets is this. I thought I created one firewall subnet. Did I not create one? Subnet, firewall subnet, this one, the route table. For some reason it has, oh, it's using internet gateway. Okay, cool, I understand. So it's using the internet gateway in this case. Yeah, I'm not sure why that rule is there, but let's go into the route table. So we're going to go to, oh, I know the problem. It's actually using the default route table. That's the problem, but we don't want it to use that, okay? We actually want it to use the route table that we did create. So something is, I think we need to fix the route. I think this is, no, something private. Yeah, sometimes these things can be a lot. So firewall route table, let's just be sure. Subnet association. Oh, okay. There is no association. That's why. So we need to first of all associate the private route table that we created, right? We need to associate it with the the firewall route table that we created. We need to associate it with the, what do you call it? The firewall subnet, right? Remember, there is always like a route table for every subnet that tells it exactly how to go out, right? So in this case, if you check very well, you check your subnet, for example. That's why I was thinking that why does it have the internet gateway? So if you check that subnet, for example, the firewall subnet, and you check the route table, right now it's using the default route table, but that's not what we want, right? So how we can solve that is that we can go back to the what do you call it? The route table, right? So the firewall route table in this case, and then we are going to do no, that's like the subnet. So we're going to go route tables. We're going to do firewall route table. We'll do subnet association, and then we're going to associate it with the, what do you call it? The firewall subnet, right? We'll save the association. Now that is explicitly associated with the firewall subnet, what you'll notice is that if we go back to the subnets and you check the firewall subnet, right? And you check the route table, you see now there is no internet gateway. You see, sometimes these things can trip people off because when I created our subnet, because I didn't give it a route table, it associated itself with the default route table, right? That had an entry to the internet gateway, but that's not what we want. In this case, because the firewall subnet itself is a private subnet that we did create, right? So what we are now saying is that when you get to the private subnet, what happens? So we're going to edit the routes. So we're just going to go back to the route table. So it's using this firewall route table. And then we're going to go to the routes and edit the routes. So there's one route that says if you are local, if you are within the VPC, use the local route. But if you're also going to the internet, that's what we need to create. So here I'm going to say if it's going to 0/0/0, use the NAT gateway, right? We know there is a NAT gateway in there. Remember right now, the NAT gateway is not highly available. I only created one. So that's why everything I'm doing, just take notice, in one AZ, US West 2A. Okay? So I'm going to save the changes. So at this point, ideally, what have I done? There is like a private subnet. There is a firewall subnet. In the private subnet, it has an EC2 instance that's running. In the firewall subnet, it has a firewall that is running. And in the private subnet, I'm saying, if you are going out, go through the firewall. The firewall has to inspect you first. Once this firewall is done inspecting you, there is also a route there that says if you're not going to the internet, go through the NAT gateway, because the firewall subnet itself is it's a private subnet, right? Okay, so with that, what do you think is going to happen if we go back to this EC2 instance? So let's see if we can still ping. I think at this point, I don't know if it's frozen. Usually that's like, sometimes it's like an indication something is not right, but let's try it again. Let's see. I'll close this. We'll start afresh. We'll go into the EC2 instance and see what we get. Sometimes also, if you don't get it correctly, that's when you can begin to see issues like this, because now you can see even the systems manager is not showing properly again, right? So what we can do at this point is not loading properly, so something is not working. So let's go back. Let's see, this is not working. Let's just check properly. So first of all, we have two places to check. There is like the private subnet. It has a route table, and the route table is saying yes, if you are going out, go through the VPC, correct. So that one is correct. We're just going to go back to the firewall subnet and check the route table. It's saying if you are going out, use the why is this showing internet gateway? This is not something it still hasn't fixed itself. So let's go through to that route table. Firewall subnet. It's still using the default route table. Let's go route table, firewall route table. I thought I saved this thing just now. Did I not save it? I did 000 NAT gateway. Use the NAT gateway, and I saved the changes. All changes have been reverted. Already exists, but it's not showing here. And you say it's already exists. Is it my UI? It actually exists. So what about the subnets? So let's go back to the firewall subnet now. So let's see the firewall subnet. Let's look at the route table. Okay, correct. I think now it's showing well. So going through the internet, you're going to use the NAT gateway. And then let's see, this is still stuck. So what we can do is see what's happening at this point. Um, so let's go and check our firewall. Let's see our firewall policies. Um, so we have the default policy that is here. Default stateless action. In this case, we have forward all. Yeah, it doesn't. This is not what I'm looking for. What about this one? There's really none, so we're not dropping it, which is good. It does have this, correct? So what else? Let's look at the policy. This is a rule group. I think it's this one. We have its source, and if the destination is this, we are dropping that, which is okay. So why is it not working? Something is not right. Let's see. The route tables are here. How many route tables do we have? So let's check this one. Firewall route table. Local is doing this. Firewall subnet is going through the NAT gateway. That's one of the things you face, right? So let's see. 000 is going through the NAT gateway, which is good. And the private route table is going through routes, it's going through 00 VPC and then local. Okay, cool. So the question is that where is this networking subnet? It's actually using the right subnet, right? So it is using the right subnet. So it's using this private subnet. So it's using these subnets, and this subnet should be what now? So let's go and open that. Yeah, it's using the private subnet. Route table is using this. It's using VPC endpoint, correct? So where could the problem be? Let's see. Did I miss one step? Something is maybe missing, but let me find it. Firewalls. Let me see what is happening here. It's in sync. Let's see. Just checking something. There's a default policy that is attached. There is what? Let's see. This is not what we want. And let's even see the default policy and see the default whatever it's meant to do on like as a default. So let's see. No, this is like stateless default. We don't really care about this one. Let's see. Then there's also this one, right? There is none, which is good. Okay, so let's take one step back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the, let's take one step back. I know I can do like VPC, I can do more or less like a network analyzer to see where something is being blocked. But let's just take a step back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the, um, I'm going to go back to the subnet that I created. So I do have like a private subnet that I created before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the route table. So it's using the private route table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a, what do you call it? So this private route table, I'll go to the routes, I'll edit the routes, and I will just remove these for now and say if you're going 000, use the NAT gateway. So let's see something. So it uses the NAT gateway, and then let's save the changes, right? So it has saved, probably deployed in the private subnet. Um, No, it's actually deployed properly because this firewall is deployed. Yeah, sometimes it's one of those things where let's even see which subnet is this. Maybe it's just the wrong subnet. Who knows? Let's see. Yeah, it's the firewall subnet. So the first subnet is correct. So let's do this. So let's go back to the EC2 instance again, and then let's connect, right? Let's see what happens. Yeah, so it's connecting. So it means that I think, yeah, so it means that the wiring to the, what do you call it, to the firewall is what is wrong in this case. So we're wiring it to the firewall, and from there it's hanging, it can't go out. So I'll fix that now. Let me see if I can quickly find where it is wrong. So let's go back to the subnet where this guy is. So we're going to go to the networking tab, go to the subnet, private subnet, and then we'll go to the route table. Surprisingly, before this call, I just finished this. Like it was like it's straightforward, but probably, I think at the beginning I was trying to beat time because there's so much to cover, and I'm like, let's just go through it. And now it's not working. So I'm suspecting I screwed something up at one point, but I'm trying to find which point. So we did see that the route table is, so I'm just going to go back to the route table. This is the route table we're interested in. I'm going to go back here and then do the routes. To the 000, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to remove this and then add one that takes us to the gateway load balancer. Use the US West 2A, correct, save changes. So we have this, right? And then we just now need to go to the route tables for firewall. This one, subnet association. Yeah, it is associated with this firewall. We can see, right? So let's see the routes. And the route says if you are going through the internet, go through the NAT gateway. Correct. Um, correct. And this NAT gateway, I guess, is let me see, it's actually in a public subnet, right? Yeah, it is. So it looks correct. If you look at the setup that we have, there's a firewall that should go out using a NAT gateway. It's local. Cool. So what's happening at this point? Let's see. Is this still working? Um, so let me go back and start again. Let's just start and see if we connect. Let's do session manager, and then let's try again. Um, So now it's working. But now I don't think I did anything. There's nothing I did extra. I don't know why it just didn't work. But now it's working, right? I don't know. I didn't change anything. There's nothing I changed. If you think about it, all the setup, right? So let me just recap what I did. There is like a private subnet. There is like a firewall subnet. We did put the firewall inside the firewall subnet, and we said from the private subnet, if you're trying to go out, instead of before where you had to go straight to the internet, go through the firewall, right? And then from the firewall, if you now have to go out, go through the NAT gateway, right? So I'm not sure why it just was hanging and now it's working, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ping Google, google.com, right? So this is going to work, right? So the only thing we now need to do is to verify like what we were doing before. So we were doing dig 8.8.8. This is also working. So this is not what we blocked. Dig 8.8 is not going to work. That's not what we blocked. But when we do ping 8.8.8, we are going directly to 8.8. We are going directly to that IP address. So this is not going to work. Okay. So this is exactly what we blocked. And if we are going to do more or less like DNS request and then use 888, right, to resolve it, it's also not going to work, right? So the task itself has been done. Because if you do more or less like ping 8.8.8, it's not going to work. We've blocked this. And you can actually tell if it's the firewall that is affecting it. So let's go and more or less like remove the rule so that you know that it's actually the firewall. So let's keep this tab handy on one side, right? So I'm going to close everything that is on the right. So just so you know that it's actually the firewall in this case that is in place. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go to the, in this case, there is like policies that we have. There's like the default policy. And in there, we have this rule, right? So we have this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disassociate it from the policy, right? So I'm going to do this. So once I do that, I'm going to go back to my firewall, and then you see it's pending, right? So it's going to redeploy again. So once it's done, let's give it time. So just so you know that, yeah, you can see it started working temporarily. Yeah, you can see it started working again, right? So that was actually affecting it. If you go and remove the policy, it's back. So we actually apply the firewall to the instance itself. Now the request is going through again. I think how I was testing it before, I was doing dig, and dig is going to more or less like try to resolve 8.8.8 using the local DNS, right? In this case, but actual traffic to 8.8.8 was blocked, and that would never go through, right? But I think one of the problem was that even at trying to test that was an issue because this machine wasn't loading, and we're like, what's happening? Was there a policy that was wrong, or like was there a configuration that was wrong? So let me recap. Usually, what we did was that there was a private subnet. We hosted an EC2 machine in there, right? And then we deployed a firewall in a different subnet. And we said, if you are going to the internet, before you used to be able to go directly to the internet, but now we want you to go through a packet inspection, something that is looking at your traffic, right? So we sent it to the firewall subnet, right? Once we did that, then in the firewall subnet, we also created a, what do you call it, a rule that says we also associated that firewall subnet to a routable. And that routable in there, we said, if you are going to the internet, once you have been allowed by the firewall, then you can go, right? And that's exactly what is working. In this case, we deleted the policy, it's back to normal, right? But if we add that policy again, that's going to block traffic to 8.8.8, okay? With that said, I'm just going to, because usually sometimes I don't do this, but here I want to just make sure we go through cleaning up the things we created. So if you think about that, it's like the firewall. We created a firewall because it's going to cost you money if you keep it running. It's not a free tier service. So I'm just going to go to firewall. I've already deleted the rule group that is in that default policy, right? So what I'm just going to do is, I think at this point I can delete the. I can actually delete the firewall. So I can. Let me try to delete and do this, right? So I'll delete the firewall. Firewall is, I think, still exists in route table. Good. I think that's because there's like a route table that is using it. So let's go and find that route table. So we're going to go to, remember there is like a, what do you call it? Route table. You go, and everything you saw is like a typical, that's how it is. Sometimes your network, your network can actually have like, you just have to know where to go to resolve things. Sometimes it could be the route table. Sometimes you could think you were targeting the private subnet and you actually targeted the public subnet. So you just need to, which is why it's good you do it in the console, and then it's easy for you to put infra as code at the end of the day, right? But it's always good you have this, make it, break it, fix it, and understand exactly how things connect, right? So in this case, I'm just going to go to the private, because it's complaining that we're using it, right? Yeah, because we're actually using it in the, if you look at the route tables, the private route table is using it, right? So I'm going to edit this route. I'm going to delete this. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to save change. And then what I'm going to do is go back to the firewall again and try to delete it. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to try to delete it again and see if it goes through this time, okay? What does it say? Okay, yeah, it looks like it's gone now. So first of all, we deleted the rule group, and we deleted the firewall. It obviously will delete the policy. It will delete also the interface endpoint it did add, which is what was being used in the route table, right? So the next thing we want to do is let's go back and just clean up the route tables we created. We created an extra firewall route table, right? So we created that. We're just going to delete it. Obviously, we can't delete it right now because there's a subnet that is using it. So we're going to go to the firewall subnet. We're going to delete it, right? Nothing is using that subnet again. Um, yeah, I think because the firewall is still deleting, it probably is still being used. Okay, so let's give it some time. But again, if you create things, know how to clean them. I think this is also something that what do you call it? Infrastructure as code can solve for you, right? Instead of you doing manual creation, manual deletion, if you have infra as code, you can just do one step to say make destroy, right? It's just going to bring everything down. But in this case, we're having to go um, through trying to get it out of the system. So let's go back to this. Let's check the firewall to be sure that it's gone. Um, yeah, it's deleting. That's why we're having that, right? So it's still deleting, but we still need to clean it up. So maybe when I come back to the console, I'm going to go back to the clean. I don't know how long this is going to take. Let me refresh. If it can take, yeah, I don't know. It's going to take some time to delete. And once it deletes, that's when we can delete some of the resources that are associated with it, right? So let me just go inside, for example, let me edit. I can't even I can't even delete that. I can't remove that policy as it stands. There's no way. So you just have to pretty much delete it, and it's going to get rid of every other thing that is part of it. So let's leave it at the firewall. So it's still deleting. Let's give it some time. So what did we do? We basically just added a firewall on top of our VPC. Remember what we did is a very simple case, right? We were blocking like an IP address, but you can do more things, right? So you can block more things. So what I'm just going to do, I'm going to go back to the slide. That's why some of these things is not something you want to show at beginner level, right? Sometimes you just want to scratch the surface and move on because you can imagine how long it's taking us to just go through just the firewall part, right? Because there's a lot of moving components, and even this is because I also abstracted a lot of things. I abstracted the creation of the subnets. Many of those things I did abstract them, but imagine you wanted to like create a VPC, create all the subnets, and then introduce a firewall. And then this complexity is going to be different if it was like a transit gateway we're dealing with, right? But again, I think it's done. Let's go back to the slide. I wasn't expecting us to stay that long on that. It just didn't. It didn't go as fast as I wanted it. Okay, so